review how we're going to approach Plan B, given that we have a set way in which we're intubating these patients during the coronavirus pandemic. In particular, I think most of us know about our patient protocols, which will involve a high-dose paralytic and a glide scope intubation. But in the event that the airway can't be secured with use of a glide scope, or we run into complications that way, it might be good to review what we can do. So most of us are familiar with our protected intubation, protocols. We are planning on using all intubations. And so we're going to be seeing our PPE, our N95, our fluid down, gloves, face shield. Have the most experienced intubator at the head of the bed. And then the sequence of events is, of course, going to be a rapid push of our ketamine, weight base, for under 100 kilos, 100 ketamine, 100 milligrams of rock. And if they're over 100 kilos, for 50 milligrams of ketamine. And your usual setup is going to be the glide scope. Just for the purposes of tonight, I'm going to use our glide scope Ranger. So this is a little portable device that we actually have on the race team. It's the same as your glide scope device that we have that's mounted, just with a smaller screen. This was actually developed for military purposes. It has a top of around 6 to 10 feet. This thing is quite industrial. You drop it, it won't crack. And a couple tips just to even the glide scope and how we approach it. I know that we're all pretty experienced doing this, but why don't we talk about just a couple things related to glide scope. I don't know if you want to move it over here. So what I'll do, actually, do you want to go around the edge? Sure. You see it. Did everyone see the screen there, the glide scope screen? Everyone can see the glide scope screen there? Perfect.
You're frozen on my end, Julian.
Okay.
Can everyone who has video or audio on please mute and turn off your video?
You can see the screen, but not well. Like you can't really see what's going on it.
There's nothing to see quite yet.
It's clear.
You guys can see it now?
Shireen, can you just turn off your video?
Can everyone see that screen okay?
Yep, well.
Perfect. So one of the things it is quite different than direct laryngoscopy, as you know, and one thing I find that people will do that it makes it more difficult to secure and get the tube in is that you give yourself sort of the optimal view for direct, and the glide scope is quite deep. And so what ends up happening is the tube wants to go down the esophagus, and it makes it very challenging to make it get up into the airway. So one of the ways to actually give yourself a better chance of securing it and getting the tube in is to back it up and give yourself an off-axis view, more of like a grade 2 view. It actually makes it a lot easier to actually go through the cords. If you are getting hung up here, one of the other things I know we all know is to actually pull back the stylet just a bit, usually with your thumb, and then it does make it a little bit easier to pass the tube afterwards. But I do find, and probably we've all found this, is when you give yourself that best view, this tends to want to go down the esophagus. And if you give yourself that backed up grade 2 view, it is quite a lot easier to pass the tube in the actual ports. So that is glide scope. Most of the time, we're going to be able to get the airway that way. But I want to focus mostly on Plan B, which is when we can't secure the airway. And the patient's now hypoxic when use an alternative form. So if the glide scope fails, particularly if the patient becomes hypoxic and you're needing to bag them back up, certainly in this setting, we don't want to aerosolize if we can, or we want to minimize that aerosolization, and that's where the LMA really comes in. So rather than use an oral airway and bag like with the plate seal, I really do feel strongly that we should all be using LMAs as a Plan B right away for the patient who can't saturates that we need to bag. It really does give you a lot more options and allows you as well to oxygenate the patient as best as possible. And I know that other institutions will use things like iGels. I do quite like our own Ambu LMAs. So these here, the oral eyes, come in the usual sizes, the 3, the 4. They actually are all intubated. So when you look at this here, they don't have the normal rate that prevents a tube from passing. And so they allow for any endotracheal tube sized appropriately to pass through the LMA. And all of them come, like this number 4 here, where it will tell you the amount of air to put in, as well as the max ETT size that you can pass. Can everyone see that max ETT size on this number 4 LMA, Ambu LMA, is max size 7.5. Is that correct? So what that means is that, again, all of your tubes can slide easily through it and be intubatable, okay, without any challenge that way. So it doesn't need to be an intubating LMA. They are all LMAs, and these are all available in our HHS airway cards. So when the patient can't be intubated, it needs to be bagged back up. The LMA is a great way to do it. I just want to show you, when they come into the package, they do have a little bit of air in them. So if you haven't put one of these in a little while, you usually have to, just to get it inside the patient's mouth, take out that little extra bit of air, okay, just to collapse it down and make it a little bit easier to pass inside the person's mouth. Sometimes we do lubricate just the back part here, so it slides easily on the hard palate. And the easiest way to insert it is actually just, if they're paralyzed, it'll be much easier. You don't have to worry about them biting down on you. But you're going to actually grab the tongue with your thumb and give them a bit of a jaw thrust, almost like a drawer type of maneuver. And because the biggest thing is that often this catches the tongue and then pushes it toward the back of the throat. So once you're holding the tongue, again, the air is removed in the LMA, and then just slide it in. And essentially all you're going to do is push it all the way to the back, all the way to the back of the throat, so you can't push it any farther. Then each size LMA comes with a certain amount of air that you're to put in. In the number 4 case, it's 30 cc's. So it's ideal to have, maybe even a 20 cc syringe, but you can just use 3 aliquots from the 10. And what you normally would see in a real person, which we're kind of perceiving here, is that it does come out a bit. And that's usually when it inflates, it's going to mount and then come up just a bit. And it's going to seal that oral pair. All LMAs work in that way. So once that 30 cc's is in, you now can attach your BVM, if you need to reoxygenate the patient, with your viral filter, HME viral filter, right onto the LMA. And in this way, I know we're all in PPE, but this is the best way to prevent aerosolization and to allow reoxygenation. So you can bag the person, the lungs move on this mannequin. And I'm really not feeling a lot of air come up through the mouth. And in a person, it's even less air. The plastic of the mannequin does allow for a little bit of air leak that I can feel. And in a person, if you did have a significant air leak, either you've undersized the LMA or you need to add just a little bit more air. So this is quite good. This is often now where we can start our plan. So this is a way to basically get reoxygenated and allow for a second attempt. Now, a lot of people that have had this situation where you can't intubate the patient immediately and have to reoxygenate them might use something much more familiar to them, which is just a bougie. And certainly this can, especially in these Ambu LMAs, pass right into the airway, and you'll get the same feedback you would with passing a bougie lines in a direct scenario, where you'll feel the clicks of the tracheal rings and or it'll hold up in the right knee center. What I'm going to encourage us to do is maybe not use this as our next plan B, but I want to show you why, is that you can't always know where this goes. And even though you can feel the feedback and know that you're in the trachea, if I'm not getting that feedback, what happens here is I'm actually going into the esophagus. One way you can try to get this in the right place is actually pulling a little bit up on the LMA, which will hopefully align it more with your larynx. And hope again that it passes seamlessly through the cords and you start to get that feedback. But I'm actually not getting that on this mannequin, and that might be the case because this is a blind bougie procedure. So while you might get lucky and you can just pass in your endotracheal tube, you may not. So one of the the things that I think is really helpful is to have the fiber optic at this point. And so this is what we have on our difficult cart and what's available to you, which is the it's Ambu aScope 3. And it does come with a little portable screen which you can mount, which I'll show you. So Loren's actually just going to come around to the other side of the screen. And there's a few neat features of this scope. So actually, I'll get you to back up just for a quick moment. So first of all, anyone that attended that critical care skills day, I got a chance to demonstrate how easy this scope is. So this scope, it does have a toggle where you can obviously move it up and down. It also has an attachment for a suction port, which you will have to have. If you're in the airway, you want suction the secretions out of the way. And there is on top a little one-way valve. So it does come with a little insertion through here, which you can attach to either a 3-way stop crack or a 10cc should you want to inject it.
Do you have the introduction?
Yes. Otherwise, the bronch tower will also work. So the other nice part about this scope is that it does actually have an attachment so that you don't have to tape the endotracheal tube. It actually has a tube holder. Okay? So that's quite a nice feature. So now if we were to actually go right through the LMA, all we're going to do is pass it right through the LMA. And the very first thing, can you see the actual screen there? So going through the LMA, very easily, the very first thing you encounter, you don't even have to be an expert bronchoscopist, is the cords and a beautiful view. And then from there, it'd be quite easy to pass the scope in. And then I just want to focus, if you can pull back just a second, Loren. And this endotracheal tube now will literally go right in through the LMA. On this mannequin, it might get hung up, so it might be a little more force than we're used to, but actually I think it went in just fine. So I've passed the 7 endotracheal tube, because remember, max 7.5 through the number 4. And we're just going to show you the Ambu aScope screen again. So I'm going to slowly withdraw my bronch, and I should see the endotracheal tube sitting in the trachea. See that? The other way, just another little check that you can do. Quick way you can know how far you are from the carina. So I'll just show you really quickly the screen again, if you don't mind. So if you go down to the carina, and you're at the carina, I'll get Loren to pan out just for a second, or to me, sorry. So now what I'm going to do, I know I'm at the carina. I'm actually going to take my fingers and hold the scope right there. And then I'm going to withdraw, not moving my fingers. And then now if you could just also look at the screen again. When I encounter the tube, which is right here, now Loren can look at me again. I know exactly how far I am from the carina, because I put my fingers on the actual scope at the carina level. So I know I'm about 4 centimeters from it. And in that way, you can also know exactly where your endotracheal tube is. So I think that this is a nice, safe backup, because it does allow, again, you to reoxygenate and allows you to have as close a tight seal as you can if you're having to bag the patient to bring their saturation back up. And then in terms of your next move, certainly another way is what we traditionally would do is if you can't pass with the blind scope, using the laryngoscope to just do direct. But I think in this way, we can also maintain that distance and try to minimize aerosolization, still get the airway. A couple other neat tricks you can do, although it does complicate things a little bit. So we do have this bronch adapter. And so one of the ways, if you really want to try to maintain is actually to attach the bronch adapter to the BVN and even place the endotracheal tube inside the LMA and attach your bronch adapter. So once again, you have a closed circuit now. You're able to even oxygenate and ventilate the patient while you're securing the airway now. So now while the RT is basically ventilating through the LMA, but the endotracheal tube, remember, is in this LMA, you can add a couple cc's of air if you want to just make sure it stays in place in the LMA. Now again, what you can do, let's have a look here. Might need you, it's okay. Can you hold this as if you're the RT? You guys see that okay? Now, essentially, I'm just going to put my bronch in through the bronch adapter. Now I'll get Loren to have a look at the aScope screen. So now we're in the endotracheal tube, which is also in the LMA. And then essentially, again, you're going to look for that perfect shot of the cords, pass your fiber optic through it. And then now again, you can pan out. Essentially, while the RT is still ventilating, you can pass that endotracheal tube. Oops. Things sliding off. Pass that endotracheal tube down. And again, I'm getting confirmation by looking at my scope. Know that I'm in the right place, and I can even figure out exactly how far I am from the carina once again. And so that's just, it's a bit of a more complex way, but in a person that you really can't take time to pass the bronchoscope, if you just really wanted to continue bagging them through the LMA with this attached, you can use the bronchodapter to allow you to pass that tube. And so there's a few different ways we can.
Bronchodapter, does it live on the
It lives in most, it lives in the difficult airway cartridge. So the other way to do it is, of course, just blindly passing the tube and trying to get lucky through the LMA, and I think that's also what we're probably used to doing sometimes. So lubricate it up. Good. And so you might very well get lucky just passing the tube through the LMA. Again, you wouldn't be able to ventilate or oxygenate at this time. So if you're getting hung up, that's again where you might run into trouble and need direct visualization to see why it's not being passed into the right place. So a couple other things we should talk about. If you do take the LMA out, by the way, you don't have to deflate the cup. Often it helps when you pull it out. Some of the secretions in the oral pharynx will actually come out with the LMA. Okay? It is a bit tricky, and so if you're not used to sort of playing around with the LMA, it might be good if it's already been a difficult airway to leave it in place for ICU to deal with later and exchange it out. As long as you have your tube in the trachea, it's not a problem. So a couple other things that do come up, and I just want to show. So what happens if you don't have your GlideScope stylet? I think that came up in one of the WhatsApp things. The best position to sort of put this in, if you have to use the regular stylet, is different than what we're used to with direct. It's more of just a C type of curve. That usually makes it easy to still use the GlideScope. So I'll get you a little on the side. See that? So again, with the C-shaped curve and that off-axis, it does tend to still make that adjustment. And again, pulling back on the stylet so that you can pass it. So again, it's this sort of positioning here that it's more of a C-shaped curve, does allow you to still get that. The very last thing I want to just briefly talk about is, and you have a really challenging airway, and you're unsuccessful even with sort of placing the tube where you can't get it through the LMA. Now this is where I'm going to get you to be my second operator. So if you do need a second operator, you can
join me on the side.
Yeah, I'm going to get you to do the GlideScope. So one of the things I hear of a lot of people that want to try bougie GlideScope. So here, I'm going to get you to try the bougie GlideScope. The actual GlideScope range. You're going to do this actually.
Okay.
So here's your bougie. Here's your GlideScope. We're going to try getting it in.
Pressure, guys.
No pressure.
Not easy.
Never wants to make that curve to go up. Never wants to.
Does it help to get that like deliberately restricted view with the bougie?
Yeah, try it. So that deliberate off-axis view, we'll see if that helps. It does help. You might be able to. The problem with the gum elastic bougie is just that it's gum. It tends to bend. I'm going to show a different way. So I'm going to get Farah now to just hold that. We can get the bougie out of the way. Now all I'm going to do is use this. I'm actually looking at her screen, and I'm going to use this as a drivable bougie. So I can look up, I can look down, up, down, and now I can make it work. And down just like that. So rather than wide scope bougie, I find really this aScope allows you to be a drivable bougie. Again, it just makes it way easier. And once I'm in, now I can actually look at my scope and follow along and pass the tube. And I'm going to switch with you just to show that it is doable. Trade Jeff. There is now going to take over as the driver of the bronch. And I'm going to give her the view up. And this is if you had trouble passing the bronch actually through the person's upper airway because of swelling or just if they were obese. And yeah, and then down is push up. Okay. That's good. Yeah. Perfect. Yay. And then you can then pass the tube. So, nice job. Yeah, it does need. Okay.
So, airway lubricant for training.
All of these techniques, I think, are quite helpful. The other thing you could do is just a primary bronch. So if you didn't want to use the LMA, I would also encourage you to use this device if you are going to use the fiber optic, which is called a Williams airway. It has a 10 millimeters, different sizes, but this is a 10 millimeter internal diameter, so it'll take even a 9 endotracheal tube through it. And it has this recessed out area, which allows you to pass the tube through it. So let me just show you, when you put this in, again, I would prefer, honestly, this is more for an awakened patient. If you want to do a primary fiber optic intubation without the LMA, you certainly could just put the Williams airway in. It makes it a whole lot easier. So now I'm going to pass Loren to follow me over to the screen. Now, as you see, as I come down the Williams airway, very first thing that I encounter again is the cords. And it just makes it a little bit easier to find where you're at. Sometimes the hardest part, besides topicalizing the patient, is actually getting through the upper airway if you're not used to how you maneuver the scope. So the actual Williams airway allows you, as you see here, I basically come right out of the Williams airway, and then I'm looking right at the airway. It does make it a little bit easier. This is often what I'll tell people if you're doing an awake intubation for the first time, you're not used to driving it through the upper airway, it's probably best to use this Williams airway, which is also found on the difficult cart. And again, what it allows you to do as well is pass the tube through the actual Williams airway. The tube itself can go through it, which is why you need this airway as opposed to a regular oral airway. And again, if it wasn't a coronavirus patient, if you're learning these times, you can use this also as an oral airway in diagnostic. So I'm going to stop there just for a moment and see if we have questions. We're moving on to things like circular airway.
Hello. Okay, we have a couple of questions or some discussion. I'm just going to go back. Okay, somebody asked, do we use MAC blades or hyperangulated blades in our wide scope?
We use MAC blades.
MAC blades.
So we have, and the other part is I usually just use a 3. It's very rare to have someone that needs a 4 because you don't need to be deep in the person's airway most times. It is possible, though, with a larger patient who has quite deep airway structures that you might, with the 3, only be able to give yourself a grade 3, which isn't great for passing the tube, obviously, so you might need to use the 4. MAC 3 is helpful for or necessary for almost everything.
Okay. Do you lube your LMAs? It seems like the consensus is yes.
Yeah.
Dr. as you mentioned. And question for the group, is it better to leave the LMA with the ETT through it as long as the ETT is in the airway?
I think if you really had that patient that was so challenging that in an LMA, you couldn't get starting to saturate, I would leave it in place so the person's transferred it in the ICU. It can be a little bit cumbersome to take that LMA. You have to take, obviously, the adapter off of the ETT and slide the LMA over.
Somebody mentioned trying to take the LMA out once you have the airway secured and the patient's paralyzed. What is the sort of evidence around aerosolization with removing elements? Like it usually would be significant.
It would, except if you've put the endotracheal now through it.
And you have a path tube.
Exactly.
Okay.
Which is why actually during our protected pool blue, what we want to do is if someone comes in with a King LT and you're running the arrest, don't take it out in the middle of the code and then try to intubate with aScope if you can, because if they don't make it, you're just exposing people to the aerosolization, and you've already gotten there. So try to get ROS before accepting that risk.
Jen Tang wants to know if the flexible, the scope could be used through the nose.
Well, let's go through the nose. So great question. So a couple things. If you're going to go through the nose, I would recommend obviously using some Otrivin, so spraying Otrivin up the nose. And then the lidocaine jelly works quite well because you already need to lubricate the scope, and it does anesthetize the patient if they're not paralyzed. It wouldn't be a scenario where I'd bail myself out if they were paralyzed and I'm having to, again, deoxygenate them. More for an awake situation, for sure, you can go through the nose. And so there's a few different schools of thought. One is to put the 7 tube in ahead of time, and that makes it a little bit easier in the sense that it's already in the oral pharynx. Now I'm going to get Loren to just have a look at the aScope again, screen. So now when you put the endotracheal tube in, it's right there. That's why you can nasally intubate someone. I almost went right in as it is. And then again, you can pass it in, and then again, push that endotracheal tube in. So now I'm going to come out, see how far I am from the carina. And I'm in pretty good, and I'm just going to come right out now. So again, you'll see we're in the nose, no concerns at all. The other way to do it is actually just to scope through. So I'm going to show you that now. So I'm just entering in like this. It does get a little bit more tricky. So in a real person, you can have polyps, you can have swelling, and it does look quite abnormally anatomy. So you just have to follow along, just like you're putting in an NG, along the floor of the nose. So when you do so, you're slowly going to come out into the oral pharynx. Now here I am. So it is a bit more tricky, which is why we tell you if you're not used to going through the nose to intubate patients, then you probably should put the scope in, or the tube in first. As well, sometimes it can be tricky to actually pass the endotracheal tube. In this case, it went quite easily. Again, I'm in the airway, pull out. You can see there we're in the nose. I'll be honest, when we do a wake bronchoscopy, so if someone's in the unit and they get extubated, but they poor cough and secretion management, we might need to just do some pulmonary toileting. So people tend to tolerate the wake bronch way nicer through the nose. So really what I do is I topicalize them as I would normally, and I would awake bronch someone through their nose, go into the lungs, and literally barrage out their segments of it.
Dr. Barker wanted to know if you could demonstrate how to remove the LMA once you have a cut in the airway.
Yeah, so we will do that. Again, not ideal, because it can be a bit tricky. So I'm going to go ahead and reinsert this. Just give me a moment.
Julian, while you're doing that, can you go through reseating it again, the LMA? For people, the video froze a little bit.
Yeah, of course. So when you get it out of the package, it does tend to have a little bit of air in it. So I do like to collapse it down completely, so it's usually taking out some air. Now you have it completely collapsed, and you can put on a little bit of lubrication on the back of it again. So again, all I would do is pinch their tongue, because the tongue tends to be pushed back into the oral pharynx, or down on the mouth a bit. You can do a jaw thrust that way, and then essentially insert this all the way to the back until you can't go any farther. Once it is, you're going to slowly inflate, and again in the number 4, you're going to put in 30 cc's, and just watch carefully again. You can see it more in an actual person, but you should see as you start to seed it, you will see it start to come out just a little bit. I don't think it's perceivable on that video, unfortunately. So once that LMA is in place, I'm going to pass that 7 tube as we did, just with the aScope for a moment. Now the endotracheal tube is in the airway. Okay, where is it here? Just about, right? Yeah. There it is. So in this case, I'm just going to put it a little bit deeper than I normally would to start. So it's a bit deeper,
And you should do that in real life when you are to take the LMA out.
Exactly. So where the intubating LMAs are a little bit, where they sort of, they had a device that you could push down and help with the endotracheal tube. So in this case, what you're going to do is take off the adapter. Now this is the challenging part because you do have to sort of hold it in place. And so what I've done in these scenarios, take out a little bit of air to make it a little bit easier to get out.
That's air out of the LMA.
Out of the LMA. So the cuff is ideally inflated here, okay? But basically you're going to be pushing it out, pushing it down, and then grabbing it from inside the mouth. So now I've stabilized my tube, and this is just coming out. And then again, I'm just going to put my adapter on top. So you can rebronch and just make sure you're in the right place. But in this case, again, that's one of we don't have an obturator that comes with these that normally you push down. But certainly you can just reach in the mouth. They're going to be paralyzed at that point. I definitely advise paralyzing them if you know the tube's in the right place. And just grabbing the tube and pulling the scope out, or the LMA out. But again, this can be a bit tricky. So I would personally just get them to the ICU and let us exchange the tube with you. Does that make sense, Kim?
Can I ask a question about that too? If we're concerned about like aerosolization and having the airway open to the operators, if the patient is paralyzed, is that less of a concern because they're paralyzed and they're not breathing? And
Absolutely.
For more questions, Kim says yes, thanks. Any techniques for getting the bougie in? So I think, Maish, maybe that question came from before Julian tried that deliberately restricted view or using the scope as a drivable bougie. Kelly got that. Dr. Gupta asked, where is the stabilizer rod for the intubating LMA kept? And apparently it is just your pinky finger for this kind.
The ambu ones do not come with one portion. So you'd have to use the traditional intubating element. You certainly could use something as an operator, so you certainly could use another 7 endotracheal tube to hold it in place if you really wanted to. But honestly, I've just used my fingers. I reached in the back of their mouth. And again, you've already confirmed it with the scope. So you're going to reach in, grab the tube, pull the LMA out.
Dr. Tang asks if there are any disadvantages of using this aScope versus actually bronch.
Sorry.
Any disadvantages to this?
No, so this is the one feedback that some people will say is that it doesn't have as strong suction as the actual bronch. So we prefer these in any emergent airway, and the reason is that there's more adrenaline flowing, you're trying to get tubes in their places, it can get broken, and our actual bronchs towers are more expensive. So we prefer to use these the most emergent airway.
Dr. Barker also has a question for Aleem. Are you okay? You only have one bottle of.
This is probably my third one.
Rest assured, Dr. Barker.
The hospital coffee shop, however, is out.
Toilet paper and Diet Coke. It's a problem. Kelly wanted to know where these aScopes live in our emerge departments.
So, great question. We have it on our difficult cart. So if you ask for the difficult cart from ICU, it will come with an aScope. The other thing you can do is just ask for the bronch to be brought. So if you ask the RTs to bring the disposable bronch, they will bring this.
And Dr. Gupta wants to know what's the turnaround time to get the aScope reprocessed or sterilized for next use? Do we have one?
We absolutely do. So this device here is entirely thrown out. I'm going to show you the scope again, the screen rather. What's great about this is as well, you can take video, you can take pictures, but essentially when you're done with this whole piece here, it's tossed out. This whole thing. This comes in a package, single use.
Damon had a good question. Would you keep it with the patient in case ICU needs to use it later on? Is that...
Yeah, so our IPAC has requested that we don't reuse these. I will say that on some patients that need frequent pulmonary piloting, we do keep it in a sort of clean bag for the patient and bring it with them. And you certainly could give it to the ICU if you want.
A couple more quick questions. So, Dr. Chang, just wanted to clarify. Sorry, the aScope is on the difficult airway cart only in ICU, or also on all of our ED?
It is not in our ED currently. That is a discussion that we probably should have.
What happened? Yeah, so that is a fight for after the current crisis.
So Kelly said the problem with this is time, and a patient with premisats not allowed time.
For sure, and that's why I don't think. And so one of the ways we used to bail out is literally you can't intubate the patient, and then you start grabbing your bronch and trying to get through the upper airway. Never help them, or very, very rarely. That can be very challenging. That's why the first thing I think to do is make sure they're oxygenating well. Put the LMA in. Again, if you're using those AMBU oral eye LMAs, they're all intubating scopes or intubating LMAs. So place that, re-oxygenate the patient, then worry about your plan B. And sometimes if it's not an intubating LMA, you put it in, at least you re-oxygenate them. You can then take it out, do your primary bronch if you want. Again, that's a bit more challenging unless you've driven a bronch through the upper.
For other sites, can you intubate Nigel also?
Yes.
Yeah.
The iGels are quite a good product, but we don't have them. But I'm still very satisfied, very happy with AMBU LMAs. I think they're fantastic.
Okay. If you push the ETT through the intubating LMA without bronch, how likely? Yeah.
It all depends. So there is a way to make it a little more successful. I'll show you one more time. So let's get this back in. I'm not going to inflate it this time, but to show you. So most times it's still going to want to hit the bottom, like where the arytenoids are, or go into the esophagus, even with the LMA. So the best way to improve your success is actually to pull up on it while it's inflated. So if you pull up, you're pulling it hopefully in a better alignment with the actual larynx. We can actually just try that now. I'm not optimistic this is going to go in, but let's just see. Feeling a little bit of hang-ups. I probably am on the course, so now I'm just going to let it down a bit more. By pulling up again. So it's a little bit of maneuvering up and down. Let's just see. Hold on. Maybe we're able to get it into the airway. Things now get quite sticky. All right, let's see. Laura, you asked this, right? Am I stomach or lungs? I think we're lungs. We got lucky.
It was Kumate, but...
Kumate. So, if you're a gambler, it can work.
And he is. So that's perfect. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Anybody?
Right. So
okay.
We talked about blind scope primarily. We talked about LMAs. We talked about either using a blind technique passing in a tracheal tube, using a bougie, or using a bronch. If you are using a bronch to drive through the LMA, we've talked about a technique using bronch adapter to do so and continue to provide ventilation and oxygenation while you're passing the tube. We talked about if you don't have a glide scope stylet, what should you do? How to insert LMAs, along with just a little bit about how we would manipulate through the nose or the oropharynx just Williams airway. And also even about how glide scope bougie is very challenging. Now, really, you want a drivable bougie like a glide scope fiber optic. All right.
Michelle had one comment. Dr. Welsford says, never a better time to ask for equipment that's required for safety and care during this pandemic. Ministry of Health will pick up the costs for pandemic. People keep typing and it keeps disappearing, but ask the foundation. We should ask the foundation for one.
For a fiber optic, Michelle, or something else?
For that aScope, yeah.
I agree.
Right, and yeah, for anybody who's at Joe's, the supraglottic device that they have there is the iGel. Dr. Karan says, can we not just leave the LMA in without an ET tube if a very difficult airway and put a plastic drape over the patient en route to ICU?
So you could. it's just more aerosol generating, obviously. It's better to secure the area. I'd say if you have the LMA in place and were to call anesthesia or ICU, will probably come to the bedside, probably with a fiber optic, and want to secure the airway before transfer. An LMA could be dislodged, but certainly, pre-hospital, our patients are coming in with PLT, supraglottic devices, and so it's absolutely able to transfer. It's just more that it's not obviously a protected airway, so I try as much as I could to get it. The other thing about LMAs is that they do work well, but you could have trouble with seal, and again, there's the aerosolization risk. And as well, because it's not a protected endotracheal device, it can still in stuff like the stomach a little bit. That might lead to problems if it's for a long duration.
Dr. Barker asks, if there's no rigid stylet for your glide scope, would McGill's be an option?
You could. So in terms of if you're using the glide scope with a bougie, yes, you can absolutely use a McGill, but I think there's a lot of moving parts there and it can be much more challenging. Certainly if you didn't have the aScope available to you as a drivable bougie and you really couldn't do anything else, you certainly could try that. The other technique that I think we've also probably done, if I can just have you come back here again, is to try, and I've had some success, but I also think this can be a bit challenging sometimes. This is where, again, the tube doesn't want to make it into the trachea, and so sometimes what we try to do is actually pass the bougie here. I'm going to try to do that now. Might be a bit tricky, and I'm not optimistic it's going to work, but let's try. This is where you're sort of caught in the glottis. Sometimes that will work. Hang on just a moment. Sometimes if you can't get through the cords, okay, you can actually hold it there at the glottis. Try to pass the bougie. But what I find is that the bougie basically puts it down into the esophagus as soon as it tries to make its way into the tube. Let's see if it does it this time. No. So here the bougie actually made it through. Again, I'm still having trouble passing it. But there the bougie made its way in. Now you can railroad that tube over time. But I find that the bougie works best with the glide scope if it's already at the glottis, like I've just showed you. Or again, you could use the McGills, which I have done once. And I did find it still to be a bit challenging to maneuver that stuff in the oral pharynx.
Kelly just said, agree that going to plan B is reason enough to have a second MD in the room, and failure of this would be a reason for failure. Pre-ox question. Dr. Kovacs on Cape Town Hall was endorsing creating some CPAP with a BVM at 15 liters, PEEP valve at 10, no bagging. Any thoughts on this as an alternative to LMA pre-ox, which may create aerosols when removing LMA if no aScope is available to the surgeon?
Yeah, so you're saying that the LMA is in place and using?
No, for pre-oxygenation, in the case of a failed initial attempt at CL, just like
right.
Two-handed seal with
the trouble is, while it is a two-handed seal and there's no aerosolization at that time, especially with a high intrathoracic pressure, because you now have P10 in the chest, when you remove that mask, you will get aerosolization. So I think the LMA protects us better against that scenario, which is also why in terms of a pre-ox strategy, I think the non-rebreathe mask is probably a little bit better. Because if you are holding a tight seal with the BBM, probably generating some degree of positive pressure within the airway. And again, when you move that, you could get aerosolization from removal of that seal. It's all theoretical, and we're going to be in PP anyway to allow for AGMPs. So really you could use either one of those.
Makes sense. Thanks, Julian. Dr. Wellsford says, in DL, with a tube that gets caught up before going through the glottis, do a quarter turn of the ETT and it will sit higher and lift the balloon from getting caught. Often go right in.
Absolutely. Great tip.
Awesome. Okay.
Right. So what I've found, and I think it's worth just reviewing front and neck access, do have these sets. Our HHS sites, our emergency UV Craig kit is here, and it comes with a scalpel, comes with a syringe, a 10cc syringe, as well as a 6 endotracheal tube and a bougie. So we're going to use our bougie technique. We did mock up something to try. I will say one of the things I worry a little bit about is that most of these patients that might have severe pneumonia and/or ARDS, and I have paralyzed these patients, and if I can't get the airway right away, even putting in an LMA, some of them remain hypoxic. Because what they need is an endotracheal tube, high intrathoracic pressure, actually reoxygenate fully. So they may not come up to 100. And so it's often that we want to go forward with surgical techniques because we can't oxygenate, can't intubate the patient. My only hazard is some patients, when you put in that surgical airway, it's still not going to fix the oxygenation problem unless you can get in a big tube and maintain intrathoracic pressure. So most of the times, it's not that you're bagging with this LMA on 100% and even with a bit of valve. If they can't bring up their saturations, it's probably not a problem with the LMA itself. It's that their lung disease is so severe. That aside, we'll talk about when you can't oxygenate and can't intubate, how we secure the airway. I think Dr. Cardhan had put this together. It's pretty awesome. I hope I can get this through. So, we're going to turn it this way.
Sorry.
I think we've all practiced this a number of times. I don't actually have a cricoid here, right? Go down. Go down. This is like a typical obese patient that may not be able to feel the landmarks.
So a bit further, that's right.
Wow, pretty neat. If you couldn't tell, of course, you're going to make a vertical incision anyway. So with our kits, you can use a prep stick if you have time, not necessary, but worth doing again if you have time. So we were going to use, you can use a 10 blade or an 11 blade. And standing on the patient's right, this is already. I think this one's used actually. I'll just use the 50. So not ideal is what we're going to do. So if you can palpate the landmarks, of course, you could just do your horizontal incision. If you can't, you're going to make the vertical incision. In this case, I can feel it. You're going to make your horizontal incision, going one side to the other, turning it around. And so when you do this, if the person's breathing spontaneously, which are patients that are not paralyzed with confidence, you're going to then put your finger inside. And often, because the cricoid is right above you, you can actually feel the posterior aspect of the cricoid because it's a complete ring. So you're going to get your finger in there, and keeping your finger in there, you're going to then pass the bougie inside here, and you're going to feel the click, click, click of the rings.
Or see it come out the bottom as it does.
Or see it come out the bottom. And now I need my 6 endotracheal tube. And this is where you can get your finger out of the wound. You're going to feel hold up in the right main stem. You're going to pass that 6 endotracheal tube to the wound. And right when you see the cuff actually go down is when you're going to stop. One of the common things is to put it into the right main stem. At this point, you're going to take out the bougie, stabilizing the tube. You're going to inflate your cuff and ventilate the patient. Now, a couple other tips. When it comes to surgical airways, especially, the anatomy becomes quite prominent. You can actually extend the person's neck. So as long as they're not in C-spine convulsions, everything comes more anterior. You either take time to put a shoulder towel underneath their shoulders, or you can even just extend their neck. And that will allow structures to be a little more common. The other thing, which I'm not showing you here, is it's important. We've already failed with Plan A. The LMA is in place. And we're still ventilating the patient as best we can. Obviously, it's an oxygenation. You can't ventilate in an intubate situation. But you're still going to be ventilating the patient as best you can. And again, try to be as clean as you can. Wear, obviously, a mask, a face shield, because when you do cut into the trachea, not in our paralyzed patients where it's a plan C. Rather, ones that are spontaneously breathing, you will get splashed with some aerosols, blood, things like that. And there are some different kits, and one of the techniques that I need to tell people to use if you're familiar with tracheal tubes is actually to use tracheal tube if you're comfortable and familiar with it. And the reason is it does two things. One is that it's shorter. You use it for trachs, so it doesn't tend to go into the right place and in. The other thing is that it does have a flange that allows you to secure it better around the neck. For this endotracheal tube, the best way is to use just firm ties. Those are the firm ties that we use to secure it in place. If you're really worried and you just completed a surgical airway, we're probably going to want to even suture that thing in place. By all means, use any means possible to secure it so that it doesn't. Questions?
Questions? Anybody question?
The other thing you can do is now take the aScope and pass it through. So the nice part about the aScope, again, is that it does go through the 6 endotracheal tube. So again, you could make sure you're in the right place just by passing it right in through, just to make sure.
Okay. Rakesh asks, should we hold LMA ventilation while using the knife to avoid aerosols through the incision?
Yeah, so in this situation, because of the unique circumstance of COVID, it would be reasonable to keep ventilating the patient up until the time that the incision is being made. Because you're absolutely right. In this scenario where they've already been paralyzed and we're on plan C, you get the person to stop. Hopefully you have sats that are acceptable, but again, you're doing this because you don't. Then you're going to just proceed through the cricothyroid membrane, past the tooth, and attach your BVM. Don't forget about your end tidal for what it's worth.
Dr. Cron asks, can you not just cut the 6O tube beforehand, or perhaps we should do that ahead of time for our kit?
You can. So certainly cutting it is one option. The problem with cutting any tube, though, is that you can cut it too long or too short. And particularly in the case of it being too short, it's more of a problem. But you absolutely can. And this adapter will connect to any part of the endotracheal tube. So you certainly can cut it. But the problem is that before you secure it in place, and certainly before you cut it, you want to know where you are in the trachea. It's much more common, as I said, to go into the right main stem, but certainly you want to get an x-ray and see where it is.
Doesn't cutting the ETT deflate the cuff line? Not if you cut it above.
Yeah, so you have to cut it above. So just show this for a second. You have to cut it above, but there's lots of tube to work with still that you can cut. Okay, lots of tube. But you're absolutely right. When you cut it below where the actual balloon is, you will cut the balloon. One of the nice devices I've seen, which is quite nice, is it looks like an endotracheal tube. It's called a quick trach kit. I think it's called a quick trach, is it? Quick trach. So you can Google it and have a look at what that is. And that device even has a way to move the tube up and down, and got a knob that you can screw and secure it in place. And it comes with a phalange, but it looks more like a 6 endotracheal tube than an actual tracheal tube. We're not as familiar.
Anybody other questions? I apologize if I'm getting people motion sickness with the camera work here. Somebody says, Dr. McCullough says, in this COVID world, if you have your 700-pound patient that looks like a disaster, you'd give 150 of ketamine, 150 of rock, try glide. If that fails, you're doing potentially LMA with the aScope. If you can't get that, then you're going to Christ. If they were satting decently with the LMA, should we just send, I bet you're going to say to the ICU with the LMA? Is that right, Dr. McCullough? Yes.
So again, I would, if you have failed to secure the airway with the glide scope as your primary technique, and now that the patient's functioning reasonably well with the LMA, I would call ICU or anesthesia to come and try at the bedside to get you or moving the patient, particularly someone who is going to be transferred to and from some beds in the 7. I just think that it's not protected. It is more aerosol generating. There is a potential of it being dislodged. And for all those reasons, I would be worried about moving that patient from where you are, it's better to, unless you're going to the OR, of course, for a trach, that would be the only place I'd move them to. If someone can come to the bedside, anesthesia, ICU, and drive a bronch. It would be very rare for someone to be able to get the LMA in and not be able to pass that endotracheal tube with a fiber optic. Someone who can do that or does that more frequently. So I would try to avoid in any situation, especially for COVID, all these patients doing this.
Thanks, Julian. Excellent hosting, Loren and Sarah. Thank you. Camera work added to the reality too. Yeah, I didn't need to read that out loud, but thanks. And then Dr. McCullough followed that up with, if it's week 6 and there's no one else to come and help you, which is a bleak thought, but possible, then Craig?
I will always come help you.
Just call Julian at home. But for real?
Yeah. No,
but like for real, should you just like...
Probably in week 6 I'll be living at the hospital, so that's...
I don't know if that's the answer you guys were looking for, but...
In week 6, I'll be sleeping in the residence.
Just an update, Elaine lives in the yurt with the llama.
I can promise you, and what I would love is if we could do this actively in some way to have you do this. And I think what you'll find is using something like the aScope is way easier than you would imagine. So everyone that I did the critical care skills day with, had a chance to practice with the fiber optic, very first thing they said is, I can't believe how easy this can be. The difficulty is more for an awake intubation. First of all, the method in which you topicalize the airway. Second of all, it is easier, of course, in these patients that don't have laryngeal swelling and abnormal anatomy, so that makes it much more challenging. Those are usually the patients I can feel on. But driving the bronch through the upper airway is the hardest part. So if you make that job easier by either using Williams airway, LMA, tube out, it does make it a whole lot easier. It just takes 1 or 2 sessions to get used to the way the scope moves to do it. It's probably no different than the first time you all tried a glide scope, where it was a little bit different technique. You got used to using a screen, a video screen, in order to secure an airway, and you know.
So let's ask the Easter Bunny for aScope. Does Best Buy have aScopes that we can get donated?
I don't know, but they are made by the ANBU aScope. And I do want to thank actually Hans, who I think is watching and actually lent us the scope for doing this today. We do have the scope, and just because of supply chain issues and worry for the future, we couldn't earn one of our scopes, so thankfully we have some teaching.
Thank you. Okay, nobody has any other questions. Julian, thank you so much. Cool. Alex, Charlie said, everybody said thank you. Fantastic stuff. Okay, awesome, guys. This was recorded and we're gonna distribute it with Julian's permission. So have a lovely evening.
You guys.
And we'll try and find a way for residents maybe to get a little bit more hands-on time with this aScope if possible, and staff, I guess, if you guys are interested in that as well. Okay, adios, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for the Blair Witch video, Loren. I know that is kind of what it was.